Greetings! Allow me to welcome you to the For the Love of Fiction podcast, a podcast dedicated to discussing story and character across a wide range of mediums. I am your host, Gavin Groves, and with me is my co-host, Mark Tobit.
Hi there.
Is that your catchphrase this week?
Yeah, I'm workshopping it. It'll be better next week, don't worry.
So how you doing, mate?
No, can't complain, man. The same old, same old.
Happy to do another podcast.
I'm still feeling the drive. It's still got a bit of novelty to it.
Let's hope that novelty is long-lasting. So from now on, as discussed in the last episode, we're going to open each with a discussion of what we've been up to. So I've been reading Michael Moorcock's Ulrich of Melnibourne, as I stated last week, and just finished reading. It's hard to know the canonical order of these books. According to the reading order, is the second book in terms of chronological order, but it's not the second book he released. It's the Sailor on the Seas of Fate, 1976. So I asked you before if you've heard of Elric, and you were a bit unsure. I'll give you a very quick intro on him. Elric is the last emperor of the civilization of the Melnibourne, and he wields the Stormbringer, this vampiric blade that feeds on his opponents. He's also an albino and sickly, and requires potion and magic to sustain himself, which sort of lends an addictive quality to this sword. So I would say Michael Moorcock's style is actually quite elegant. I may have compared Elric to Conan before. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Have you read Conan? I can't remember.
I'm familiar with, but I've never read any of the novels.
One of the things is, well, there was only ever one novel, if I remember correctly, and it was unfinished. It's all short stories. If you're talking about the Howard originals, and yeah, incredible, isn't it? Incredible. And one thing that always really captured me about those books, was the Lovecraftian influence on the horror. And Michael Moorcock sort of carries that over with the indescribable nature of the monstrosities. You know, you do get lizard men and stuff, which you expect from sword and sorcery fantasy. And just like Conan, like the main character of this story, Elric, is a sword-wielding, vagabond. He's exploring the world, you could say, looking for inspiration, looking to learn about the kingdoms, rather than just being a thief. I suppose that Conan is. That's self-serving, I would say. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's the story starts where he boards a ship that just appears out of nowhere, meets these three warriors, and learns from the ship's captain that he was always fated to land on this ship. And they were going to travel between realities and time to fight a sorcerer. I may have mentioned to you as well that it was like multiverse-esque, and that is very true. It's interesting. It introduces the idea of the Eternal Champion as well, which runs through a lot of Michael Moorcock's other stuff, which I've yet to read. But yeah, this is the third book I've read of the series, and it's a yarn. We all like a yarn every now and then, don't we?
Something easy and enjoyable. I know what you mean.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. I've also on the cusp of finishing a rewatch of the cult 1996 British TV series This Life. Do you remember This Life?
It's a classic, man. Back in the day.
Did you watch it when it was on originally?
Pieces, but I knew of it. Certainly, man. It was one of the cult hits of, mid-90s television, wasn't it?
Cult 9, yeah, that's right. I remember chancing upon it at night or something, and there may have been sex, and that might have been why I watched it. I must have been 15 or something.
Our motivations were very different back then, weren't they?
But yeah, as you say, it was a cult TV show. What's really interesting is that at the time the show was quite controversial and quite forward thinking. It showed drugs, people enjoying drugs. It showed sex, women enjoying sex, which at the time was not really. Yes, it was taboo. That's right. All very human, flawed characters. It's about a bunch of Lord graduates in a house share, just living out their lives, just doing stuff, earning money, going out drinking, looking for a girlfriend or boyfriend if you're in the case of some of the characters. And I just always found it really fascinating. just because of the characters. Daniela Nardini's Anna is an absolute standout character. Her performance is just absolutely riveting. I mean, she's a woman, as stated earlier, who enjoys sex and partying, very taboo, but she's also very funny. Very funny. She is as powerful and witty as any of the male characters. A lot of them try to, like, put her down a little bit, and she's always got a line back. She's always giving it back to them, and I love that. I just love that. And her power also, like, lends over to her sexuality and her enjoyment of being single. Again, probably something that's not quite so thrilling today. Maybe in the 90s it was a lot more exciting. There's also the character Warren, gay and openly gay, which was a bit controversial. This is before Queer as Folk. Can you believe that?
Yeah,
That's another, yeah. Before Queer
that's
as Folk,
another
mate.
definitive 90s
Yeah,
British TV
absolutely.
show.
Yeah, and Warren, this character, was having therapy, and the way they portrayed it was like the shots were from the view of the therapist and talking to Warren and making him seem almost like an interview, I suppose. Which I suppose, therapy is kind of a one-way interview when you look at it that way. Which also was quite forward-thinking because therapy was a bit taboo nowadays. Everyone has therapy, don't they? I've had it,
Yeah.
you know. But also interesting to point out about this series, Andrew Lincoln, a very famous actor now, obviously from The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes,
Hmm.
and Jack Davenport, who plays Miles, was he's in everything nowadays. He was in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know the one. Yeah. But I
Yeah, I
think
remember it from another show of the era called Coupling.
coupling. Yeah, that's right. Andrew Lincoln was also in Teachers. Not long
Yeah.
after that.
Just
But
some very good talent from that era of British comedy.
it's
So,
crazy. It's quite crazy. Speaking of talent, even more so, one of the most iconic things about that show for me, and what really adds to its tone, is the soundtrack, which was handpicked by Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais.
well, that's a random name
I
to
know, right? I
pick.
couldn't believe it. So on the soundtrack, you got the Charlatans, you got Blur, Lightning Seeds, Pulp, Manic Street Preachers, Suede, Oasis, Supergrass, Prodigy, all
Oh,
of
it's
the
the
like,
who's who of all the indie. Of,
absolutely, all the who's who of the '90s groups,
Hmm.
handpicked, and like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I could say I would be able to recommend it to someone who's never seen it before, because it very much is a snapshot of another era. There are no mobiles. Can you believe that? No mobile phones, no
It's
social
strange to
media.
watch a show like that now,
Yeah.
and something that's just so ingrained in culture these days to the point where it has a massive impact on a lot of the different entertainment that we watch. In terms of that just simply being a concept that exists,
Uh-huh.
and having that sort of going back to an era when that wasn't so prevalent.
Hmm. No digital TVs, no smart TVs.
No internet.
Something I absolutely. That's another thing. Something else I found like kind of crazy about it is with social media, and because of our phones, we are always connected, aren't we, to other people? There's always someone else out there. But they're just a fingertip away, a finger press away. And there are scenes in this series where the characters are like in their rooms on their own with music, and it just that kind of occurred to me that they're in their room completely alone with
Like,
no access
yeah,
to anyone else. Do you understand what I mean by that? That's like an alien concept almost to me at this point, where like you know, imagine living life without a mobile phone now.
yeah.
Imagine living life without having contact to everyone
I was
whenever.
discussing this not too long ago actually with
Oh
somebody
right,
where
okay.
we watched this old movie from the 80s called Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh yeah.
Which
Yep.
I think it ends up with at one point the characters are moving into their new property and they start ranting about the fact the lack of internet connection and
Yeah.
the telephone line and stuff like that and how it'll be able to handle on their computers and things like that. And at the time, it was played up for the fact that oh look at these geeks. That's pretty standard stuff now to like respect
Yeah.
and expect out of your accommodation.
Hmm.
And it just goes to show how much sort of like that of that culture has just become the norm.
Hmm. It's crazy. And I really enjoy like just like viewing life from before social media. I suppose we are like Generation Z. We know what it's like to have a life without social media, the internet, and just
Oh,
it fascinates me because I'm so used to it now.
well, we're the analog digital generation.
Hmm.
We're the
Hmm.
generation that grew up before the rise of the internet, but still, it is still dominated a significant portion of our lives.
Hmm. Over half of it now. Over
Exactly.
half of it. Yeah, since I was
So we
18,
got to
19.
appreciate both sides of it.
Hmm. But yeah, my final item on my list is I've started reading The Last Temptation of Christ, the novel, Greek 1955 novel by Nikos Kazantzakis, published in English in 1960. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, I've heard of The Last Temptation of Christ, but I
It's,
heard it was somewhat of a controversial story.
yes, yes. It's most famous because of the film, I feel, for maybe English speaking, I don't know, or anyone in the 80s. Martin Scorsese film from 1988, Willem Dafoe playing Jesus, which I remember very well, soundtrack by Peter Gabriel, which I remember very well for some reason, probably because of Dad. But yeah, it was hugely controversial, condemned by the Catholic and Greek Orthodox churches. It's about Jesus dealing with his impending sacrifice. I mean, imagine that.
Hmm.
Imagine Jesus having characterization and
Having doubts potentially.
yes, and dealing with temptation. Sex, family life, the idea of living a normal life. I've not finished it. I'm like a quarter of the way through it, but it's very powerful. Very powerful. And some of even as translated, some of the descriptions are incredibly powerful, especially with Jesus dealing with temptation. It's like when he faces temptation in any way, there's like this embedded sensation inside of him that's described like stinging, like thousands of stings, and he just can't handle it. And he like covers his head, and he's horrified by the sensation of it. And it really made me wonder about the nature of such a reaction. Is it embedded because of teaching, or is it embedded because of morality in that character?
Is it like a supreme empathy or something like that?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
representing.
I think that's what the novel's about, if I'm honest. Already, I think it is talking about free will and temptation and choice.
Did Jesus have any free will in the plan that he was
Yes,
apparently a part of?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's fascinating stuff, to be honest.
Speaking about it, but from a purely sort of agnostic atheist point of view, so in terms, there are some aspects of that story that would be intriguing to explore from that angle.
Absolutely,
Actually humanize Jesus rather than
that's what this book
deify
is
him.
doing. Definitely. I mean, I'd never criticize anyone for their beliefs. People are allowed to believe what they want, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of good in the Bible, as far as I'm concerned. But something that my dad said to me once that has always stuck with me when he recommended I read it was that it's the original story. It is a story. It's a collection of stories that are mythology at this point. Even Samson and Delilah, you forget is from, the Bible. And so it represents something important in literature. And I have read the majority of the Bible over the years for enjoyment. This book is interesting me a lot. I'm looking forward to finishing it and reading. And watching the film, because it's always. I remember seeing trailers and just always being fascinated by the idea of it. Anyway, what about you? What have you been up to?
Oh, well, first things first. I've got to the end of Silicon Valley. Finished it, and it certainly delivered. It was very much an entertaining show. I mean, each series raised the stakes, and each series conclusion, due to the fact that each season builds to a climax, it really delivered. I will be honest. It kept me laughing, kept me guessing as to what was going to happen all the way up to the end, and it was just an immensely satisfying watch. It's something that I'm going to be recommending to a lot of different people, and it is something I should be watching again. When it comes to rewatch value, I normally give things around about 6 months to a year before I go back and visit them again, even if I like them a lot. Yeah. I'll give it about. Well, some people have to leave things longer. Some people like to watch things repeatedly. I mean, I've got friends of mine who they can repeatedly watch things like Friends and all those sort of shows, more or less on repeat. But I like to leave it a little bit of time if I'm going to rewatch a show, even ones I've seen multiple times before.
For me, it's years, mate. It's not a month.
You like to step away and then let your
I do, yeah.
palette shift and change in the interim.
I do. I mean, there are comfort films and series that I would watch over and over again. I mean, I've been known to rewatch Red Dwarf.
Red Dwarf is one of those shows that I can flick that on at any time.
Yeah.
And even if it's like an episode, even especially from the earlier seasons, like season 2 to 4, for instance.
Yeah.
I can watch those weeks apart and I won't see any problem with that, because some of those episodes are just like for instance, the Marooned episode where it is just Lister and Rimmer.
Yeah, it's a great episode.
That's an episode that I consider that one of the high points of that entire show.
Well, it covers what makes the first and second series, for me personally, good. A lot of, Red Dwarf didn't take off, did it, until the first season, so it became like a space opera comedy. But I always liked its classic British comedy leanings, the class system, the poor and the rich, the public school and the private school. Rimmer and Lister are polar opposites. And while that sort of element of the comedy is toned down over time, an episode like Marooned brings it back to the fore, and I'm a big fan of it as well.
I see. So yeah, Silicon Valley was a show that I'm glad that I finally gave time to. And it's one that's going to stay in my own personal collection in terms of wanting to revisit at a later date.
I need to get around to watching it.
I'd encourage, man. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
It's on Netflix, right?
I'm not sure. I had to buy a copy of a DVD to watch it.
Oh, right. Maybe I'll just borrow the DVD off you then.
Yeah. What else? In terms of reading, I've recently got into a manga series called Tower of God.
Oh, okay.
So this is an interesting... the thing about manga is that it's very easy to find. For every one good manga, you're going to find about 20 to 30 mangas that all follow that same formulaic shonen quality of a young boy with powers he doesn't understand, who slowly develops and gets stronger over progressive seasons until eventually he takes on the big bad of the story, often with moves and powers that develop and change and get more powerful with more epic battles. Now, Tower of God does somewhat fall into this category as well.
So is it a shonen?
Somewhat. It's a Korean manga.
Oh.
So it's written by a gentleman who goes by the pen name Slave in Utero, but his real name's Lee Jong-hui. And recently I've been reading a lot more of the Korean style of comic books.
What makes it... Sorry to interrupt you there. What makes it Korean style versus, say, Japanese style? Is there something that you can...
Specifically, I've found that a lot of the Korean styles of comic books are formatted for a mobile phone.
Oh, right.
So the actual panels are set so that it's individual panels, so that it's easier to read on a phone rather than a manga. If you were to read that on your phone, you have to turn your phone sideways, zoom in certain panels to be able to appreciate the detail. These are actually designed with the intent of being viewed on a phone, which is in a vertical format as well. And a lot of different artists play with this concept in terms of stretched panels that can go for several thumb scrolls that kind of develop and shift and change and actually utilize the medium in which it's presented. It's very interesting to see some of the ways in which it's been used. And this is another story in that fashion. It's all about a world wherein an entire realm that consists of a tower. And people that aren't in the tower are fighting to get into the tower. The tower has numerous levels. On each level, to be able to ascend a level, you have to go through tests, trials, and ordeals until you eventually settle at the level which defines how powerful you are. And the aim of all citizens within the tower is to get to the top, wherein your wishes will be granted, at least according to the legends. But the thing about this book is I'm around about issue 100 right now. It's at issue 500. And I still don't fully understand the tower at which this is all taking place. This is the thing. Unlike some shows which may give you an exposition dump after the first 20 issues of just explaining the entire realm, all you ever hear in this story is exactly what you need to hear and what the main character would know.
Well, that's good. That's what creates tension.
This is it. And new developments. For instance, there's an aspect of the tower that there are 10 families who rule under the Lord of the Tower. You're still not aware of who all 10 families are. You've met members of those families and how they influence, and there's politics in play. There are multiple people with certain political agendas that they want to push. And whilst the cast is starting to swell a little bit, and sometimes this can be a bit tricky with a cast that can start to go into double digits sometimes, sometimes it can be a bit tricky to remember who is behind, who is with who is looking to screw over who, and how it's all playing out. But to its credit, it is an interesting story. It's all about a protagonist that, wherein the love interest of the story has apparently become the antagonist. And rather than being sort of like a romantic story, it's actually something a little bit different. It's a story that I haven't necessarily seen before, and I'm curious to see where it's going to go. Now, one thing that did get me into it initially, and I was going to get into it at one point early on, was a couple of years ago, I came across it and found that it already hit issue 500. At this point, I think if I found a manga that's at that level, I think, excellent, I've got a deep dive on my hands, at which point I read that the creator had unfortunately taken a hiatus due to health conditions. So, and anytime you see that in a story, I mean, my heart always goes out to any sort of like creator who is unable to complete his creation. But I also don't like to start a story that's unfinished if it's uncertain whether or not the story will be finished.
The thing is, with a lot of manga as well, I have found over the years is that writing and drawing a manga is often the full-time job of said writer/artist, and often they don't end.
This is it. I mean, this is
good
like what
example,
Oda for One Piece, yeah.
yeah, Guyver as well, which is a big one for me. And I believe that Yoshitaka, I've forgotten his name, Yoshitaka Takaya, I think his name is. He's quit. I know that, and never finished it. He's either quit. I heard he was ill, or I heard that he just got a full-time job because he wasn't making enough money from it anymore.
This is it. They do
And
not
I've
get
always
paid
had
well.
I've always had an issue with ongoing stories like that don't have an ending. How a writer can not have an ending in the first place is it concerns me greatly. There must be an ending,
Yeah.
because if you're dragging something out, where do the characters go?
Especially if you're inviting your readers to go on a journey that could potentially take years.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of some of these mangas wherein you do often get into them before they've even really hit their stride, and then you start reading it on a weekly basis, and the idea of a story like that just ending, that could be a little bit unsettling to me. I don't like the idea of an unfinished story.
Yes, I agree. So yes, we'll be getting on to disgusting. Let me try that again. So yes, we'll be getting on to discussing Twisted Metal, the upcoming television series, and maybe a few tidbits about the games as well, as it comes from our childhood. Does it not?
Absolutely. It's something that has always stayed with me a little bit ever since we first played it in multiplayer mode.
Very memorable. But yeah, so with that, I'm going to hit you guys with a break, and we will be right back.
Okay then, so welcome back to the podcast, and we now lead into our first segment, which is going to be a discussion of Twisted Metal, which is something that's very close to mine and Gavin's hearts, with something that dates back quite early on from when we were first hanging out playing computer games, doesn't it?
I want to say the ages of 14, 15 maybe.
Thereabouts. I think you're on the money, man. I mean, we didn't get into the games quite just as they were being released. However, I think it was about a year or two after they'd really hit the market that we properly started playing those games.
Do you remember how we got into them? How between you and me and probably Glenn Wilson, another one of our friends at the time, how we discovered the franchise?
Ah, tell me, man.
You don't remember?
No.
It was a rental.
I see. Just a random pickup.
Yes, it was the cover of Twisted Metal 2 / World Tour, depending on where you are in the world. And it had that like incredible image of the Axel character, the guy who stood with the two wheels attached to him.
That's a classic idea for a character.
Yes. And I either me or Glenn were in Starburst, the place where we used to rent video games. We obviously were too young to work or work enough to earn money enough to buy video games, so we just rent from Starburst around the corner from us. And I think that's what happens. One of us spotted it, and we'll always give that a go. Took it home, and then
Now, this is the thing. Twisted Metal was a series of games that came out starting in 1995 and was the brainchild of David Jaffe, along with a company Single Track. Now, David Jaffe had a bit of history in the industry prior to this, didn't he?
He did, yes, that's right. He was a tester for the company Sony ImageSoft in the 16-bit era. This was before the release of the PlayStation. He worked on, off the top of my head, one of the Mickey Mouse games. He worked on maybe one of the Spawn games, I think. Maybe the Hook game. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah.
So he had a little bit of experience in the industry prior to this, and he'd made somewhat of a name of himself. And it was, I believe it was a trio of people that were in a car initially, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They were caught in a traffic jam, I believe, coming out of LAX. And in that traffic jam, they started to make jokes about the idea of having guns and missiles on their car to relieve some of the frustrations of having to deal with the congestion. It wasn't long after that Twisted Metal was invented, which I think we can see the parallels there, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And the first game was released in 1995. Now, off a budget of $850,000, this sold 1 million sales.
It was one of the earliest PlayStation games, correct? Is that right?
That's correct. And it was a game style that hadn't been done before, really.
Not in 3D.
No, I mean, to be honest, the parallels can be drawn between this and the likes of, say, Mario Kart.
And Rock and Roll Racing, actually.
Yeah. But this was a bit more of a mature game than those. It was a little bit more violent. It had the vehicle damage, which was something new that hadn't been seen really in gaming up until that point. I mean, it was actually quite an unprecedented success. I mean, that was the year, I believe it was Electronic Gaming Monthly voted it their game of the year. And this is the year Chrono Trigger came out.
Really?
Yeah. So it was a sleeper hit. And it has spawned a significant franchise. There have been multiple versions of this game over the years.
Yes.
However, a lot of the purists of the fans do point to the first two games as being the defining two that captured them initially. And it has had somewhat of a troubled development down the years in terms of the later games. But those first two games are the ones that we remember. Specifically the second one, which came out a year later in 1996. And that, now based off the success of the first one, that nearly doubled the sales on the first one.
It was, a lot of people I know played it.
It was, it did everything. It turned up the mechanics. They tightened the engine, if for want of a better term, and the levels were more interesting. Although, do you still remember the Paris level?
It is the level I think of when I think of that game.
That's the level that caused controversy.
Well, because of the Easter egg, yeah?
Yeah, the destruction of the Eiffel Tower. Turns out that was still an era when some countries would get rather touchy about destroying their landmarks. Though I do believe there was one part in that game where you could aim your guns off the edge of the level and shoot the Statue of Liberty until she was wearing just her underwear.
Yeah.
So...
Could I just return you back, though, to the Paris level? Because one of the things I absolutely loved about this game was the soundtrack. And the Eiffel Tower stage specifically had like a rock metal rendition of the French nursery rhyme Frère Jacques. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And it's London Bridge is falling down basically. Long story short, isn't it? It's brilliant. I just remember like playing it and just like me and Glenn in the split screen 2-player mode and just like loving it, just singing along to the music. I think that was in the era when we could put PlayStation discs in our stereos and play the music off the game.
I remember that. They used to just queue up as normal audio tracks on a CD player.
Right. The first track was always just data, and you couldn't. But yeah, and then we used to just like play the music full blast and just like headbang and whatever. It was great, good times.
Oh, with the music of Twisted Metal has always followed a very similar tone for the most part in terms of being different versions of metal. I mean, later on in the series, the likes of Rob Zombie joined.
Oh yeah.
And not just on the music either. He actually became a playable character in the later versions. So. Now, the thing about Twisted Metal is it flopped outside the US. It was very much appealing to that US demographic in terms of what they were looking for in the game, but outside of the US, it was not promoted or pushed that hard. I think a lot of people that got into it outside of the United States got into it probably in a similar fashion as you and me, wherein we stumbled across it.
Well, the first game was not well reviewed over here at all. I remember it was criticised for its awful graphics and its dodgy gameplay and simplistic design, ironically. And then I remember the score it got in most magazines was probably like mid-70s, maybe. And I know for a fact that Twisted Metal 2 got much better review scores. I remember maybe it was Play Magazine really went on at how it had improved its design, philosophy, depth. Do you remember they added like the Street Fighter style special moves?
No, I've totally forgotten about that.
Yeah. Do like button commands and stuff, and you could do like a shield and whatever.
I see.
I mean, like logically, like it makes sense because Jaffe said in various interviews that a lot of the mentality in the design philosophy was to replicate a fighting game. That's why you had all these intricately designed characters with backgrounds. You had the characters, but not just the characters. You had the vehicles that were like extensions of their characters. I mean, Sweet Tooth, so iconic. Even now,
he went on to define the franchise. He is the
Exactly.
character that first comes to mind now when you mention Twisted Metal.
Absolutely. But there's a few other characters I really liked as well. Quite a few others. Mr. Grimm, like the Grimm's Reaper on a motorbike.
That was cool. Yeah.
He was cool.
And as we mentioned before, Axel.
Axel, yes, of course, fantastic. And also, there's another one I liked. It's kind of silly though. Mr. Slam. He's like this guy with a JCB with like the claw on the front. Very silly. Very, very silly. But fun.
As I say, this was a game that knew exactly what it was and didn't try to be anything else. And the essential storyline of Twisted Metal, the story wasn't deep. However, it had a certain focus in terms of the fact that all of these events were put on by a shadowy figure called Calypso, who would run these tournaments with the specific intent that the winner would be able to wish for whatever it is they desired, and he would grant that wish. Very much a Faustian deal in terms of a monkey's paw, I think is the more tropey term for it these days, wherein what you wish for would destroy you. And this is a trope that I've always appreciated in fiction. I always enjoy seeing it. I don't know why, the whole kind of you'll get exactly what you deserve or be careful what you wish for sort of like wishes. And to that end, it's part of the research for this. I fell down a little bit of a YouTube rabbit hole and actually watched a video which collated every single wish granted in the entirety of the Twisted Metal franchise. And some of the later ones become very interesting and very deep diving into the character's backstory, especially the likes of Sweet Tooth and the like.
Yes, Sweet Tooth got developed quite
interesting.
Yeah, quite horrifically, if I remember correctly, as well.
That's it, yeah. And that was, I watched that with the same zeal that I'd watch a Mortal Kombat Fatality compilation.
Thing as well, I think that made the game really exciting is that the PlayStation, as a console in a time, was on the back end of the CD-ROM push of FMVs. Before the PlayStation came out, you had the Philips CDI and the 3DO, and they were these first, and the rise of the PC CD-ROM, of course, was happening at this time. And video games was trying to push themselves into a more narrative-based form. They were basically trying to copy films by having tons and tons of cutscenes and really bad gameplay in between. Aside from that footnote, what I'm trying to say is that Twisted Metal featured really good cutscenes that told the story, which brought it to life. Brought the characters to life, didn't it? And engaged with you as a player, engaged with your imagination even more.
It made it more than just cars hammering into each other. There was actually characters driving these cars, and
you could read profiles. They had stats. Again, going back to that fighting game concept, which that dates back as far as Street Fighter 2. You have a selection of characters, all with distinct personalities and special moves and styles that are represented by their personalities and vice versa. And it just, there's always someone for everyone. There's someone for you to like the look of, to play and to become attached to, and potentially see their ending and whatever. But I think that these kinds of games that do etch a degree of backstory into its characterization give you, the player, the space to fill your own headcanon as well. You become attached to the characters and just they sort of live in your head as you're playing them. And they write their own stories, and that makes them even more appealing.
Now, to that end, in terms of a game that we did play a significant amount when we were younger, and the storyline, for the most part, was interesting. However, if you had asked me to adapt a computer game into a TV show, Twisted Metal may not have been my first suggestion, because the storyline, it's interesting, but it is somewhat paper thin by comparison to some of the other games that came out during that era.
Actually, let me put something to you. George Miller could have done it. George Miller could have made a Twisted Metal movie.
Oh, in the
Mad Max.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Fury Road is essentially Twisted Metal with a from another mother. So
Sorry.
no,
Anyway,
yeah, absolutely. It's that there is a certain aspect of that dystopian future with petrol.
I love that. That's one of the things that I found so engaging about the games.
It is. It's something that's something about that concept. It doesn't get used too often these days, but when it does, it's always a pleasure to see it.
Maybe it was tapping into my love of Mad Max 2 secretly. Maybe it
Yeah.
was. I would consider. We're not gonna. Maybe one day we'll discuss top 10 films or something from a decade. I don't know if I could do top 10 films
Dystopian
of all
futures.
time. Who knows? But Mad Max 2 is definitely a film that's up there for me.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
maybe it did touch on that. Maybe there's something about customized cars with spikes and gun turrets and things.
Overchargers and
Yeah, it's just really exciting.
yeah. There is something primal about it at the same time.
And that dystopian or post-apocalyptic style setting that they're fighting in as well.
But regardless of that, the fact is they still did make a TV show out of this.
Yes, of course.
It was made for the Peacock network, and I will be honest, there has been a recent push of adaptions. Well, I say recent. I mean, there's always been an element of computer games being converted into movies and television, with varying degrees of success. I mean, we both remember as far back as the likes of the Mario Brothers and everything. The first time round, actually.
Are you talking about the live action movie, or are you talking about the Super Mario Brothers Super Show?
I'm talking about the live action movie.
Because you cannot criticize the live action Super Mario Brothers. Sorry, let me rephrase that.
Oh, well,
You cannot
criticizing that.
You cannot criticize the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. No, I will not let you do that on this podcast.
Lou Albano was a phenomenal Mario. As long as also Bob Hoskins, he was a very interesting take on the Italian.
That film has grown on me over the years. I am partial to it. I really am.
I will be honest. You do feel that whoever watched it had done a sort of like
Blade Runner binge the night before and got really drunk. And then got the letter through while drunk about doing a Super Mario Brothers movie. And went, oh dear.
Yeah, don't worry, guys, I got this one. So,
just make sure there are dinosaurs in it.
And mushrooms.
says Nintendo.
Yeah, you can see him like ticking off every single one of the bullet points. I got warp pipes, I got mushrooms, I got the dinosaurs. We got
and what else? Ba-bam.
Yes. And it's somehow this strange, crazy, insane movie where I think just about every major character in it was on some varying level of drunk whilst they were filming. Still has a significant amount of charm to me. I don't know. But
it's strange, isn't it? I remember seeing like the billboard off around the corner from Westcliff train station, and this was around the time I believe when after my parents had divorced, and my dad used to pick me and my brother up and whatever. We used to go to his house in Westcliff, and we just walk past the Super Mario Brothers billboard poster almost every Saturday, and it was like a really exciting time actually. And I was so young. Must have been 11 maybe, and going to see that movie in the cinema.
It was.
I'm not really sure what I thought of it. I mean, did you? I mean, can you say that you? Yeah, can you say that you hated it? Could you say that?
Hate it.
Exactly. I don't think we knew any different. We just watched it and went.
We were still very innocent in the ways of cinema, and yeah, at the end of the day, we were seeing Mario on the big screen, and that in and of itself, it could have just been 90 minutes of level 1 repeated over and over again. I'm pretty sure we would have given it a solid 5.
I think that's just the callbacks, isn't it? Oh yeah, it had it had mushrooms and it had Yoshi in it, it had Koopa in it, it had bombs in it, it had Goombas in it. The Goombas are the best thing about it, and that's enough. Weird, very strange.
And to that end, I mean, that is a movie that strayed somewhat far from its original source material. And over the years, they've learned from this. They've learned that you can't do that. I mean, there is a reason that these IPs.
Let me ask you a question. Let me stop you there, right? Okay, let me put something to you, right? If the Super Mario Brothers movie was not set in a weird cyberpunk dystopian future and was actually set in the Mushroom Kingdom, would you be saying, like, it actually was accurately depicted as the Mushroom Kingdom? Loads of grass and hills and Princess Peach's castle, like everyone they were all Goombas and Toads instead of weird like cyberpunk rock people in the streets. You know.
Well, that is the movie we did get like within the last year or so.
Agreed. But you know, it makes you wonder really if it was done out of necessity. Makes you wonder.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things, it's just often a director who can't believe their luck that they've managed to get a green light on their request to Nintendo.
Maybe it was maybe it was so unfilmable they just went with something mental like Blade Runners.
Yeah, potentially.
You know.
But more recently, these sort of adaptions are sticking closer to the source materials that they're taken from. The likes of the more recent Mario and Sonic. And there are a number of other games that are currently in the works across the board, which are looking to be converted to TV shows and movies in the near future. There are plenty over in the past, such as the likes of Tomb Raider, and more recently, the likes of The Last of Us, which are proving really popular. I know that they've got plans in the future for the likes of Metal Gear Solid.
Yes. Is that supposed to be a film or a TV series, though?
I'm uncertain. I have to be honest. I've only heard rumours.
It's been rumoured on and off for years, but they recently came up again. Someone optioned it, I think.
I kind of hope they just go back to the first Metal Gear Solid. Not Metal Gear, but Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, I agree.
And tell the story of Liquid and Solid Snake, and just do a polished action movie with Revolver Ocelot and everything about that.
That's it. Oscar Isaacs.
Oscar Isaacs.
Yeah. He was in a lot of things, mate.
That's what I'm going to Google a little bit later, actually.
He's in June. He plays his dad. He plays Apocalypse in the X-Men film. He is Poe in the Star Wars films.
Yeah, yep, got it.
Yeah, I believe he was actually set up to play Snake.
Interesting. I mean,
in the most recent.
He's somewhat of a versatile actor. I'd be curious to see what he'd do with something like that.
He's all right.
Yeah. Maybe it can make or break him. So we'll see.
I think
but has been described by some as can sometimes be a touch bloated, and Hideo Kojima does require a little bit of an editor at times, considering
that's why if they do a film, they need to base it on Metal Gear Solid 1.
Yeah, it's a much more streamlined story.
That's right. It has enough meaning and enough ideas behind the action for it to say something. Although whether or not it's out of date by this point, they might need to modernize it a little bit with the technology. But what it says about our origins, our DNA, let's say, our history, our heritage, our destiny, is a very human concept. And
all the way down to the concept of like nature versus nurture, and what is it that makes a human being? Yeah.
Yes, and it does a good job of all of that. So there is a good enough story there. What is kind of crazy though, when you think about it, to digress, is Metal Gear Solid 2 kind of predicted the future.
In what regard?
With the information, the use of information. It was all about it. It's all anti-internet.
That is very true.
Yes, that's what the Patriots are like, trying to control the world using information.
Well, certainly, he controls the source of information, controls public thinking.
Yeah, they're re-releasing the. This is going to date this podcast really badly, but the Konami are finally re-releasing the games, although not the Twin Snakes, but they're re-releasing Metal Gear Solid 1 PS1, Metal Gear Solid 2, and 3 as like a. So, it'd be interesting to replay 2. Actually, it's been a long time. But there's a lot of cutscenes. Oh, a lot, and Raiden. Anyway.
There's also one of the other 2 games that names I've heard bounced around that maybe go, ooh, that'd be interesting, especially in the modern day setting in terms of the level effects that we can do these days. And one I did see was Shadow of the Colossus, which I'd be curious to see that made in some sort of live.
Have you ever played the game?
Yeah, I do remember those games. That was one which came across it on a demo disc for PlayStation Magazine. And
demo discs.
Yeah, I used to love those. And that was one of the games that's with no concept. I'd never played Ico, the one prior to it.
Nothing like I like anyway.
Yeah, but the idea of there only being like 20 or 25 bad guys in the entire game, but you had to straddle and crawl and climb across these huge hulking beasts with the intent of hitting the weak spot for massive damage. And that was just an interesting concept to me. It was totally out of left field, and I really liked it.
Tonally as well, right? Very interesting. I've never played it myself, just seen videos. I've just never got around to it.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it seemed at first you think it
can
is
they?
just boss battle after boss battle, but it's more than that.
I was about to say, like, there is a story, right?
Yeah.
And there is, subtext, but
Mhm.
is it filmable? Not really. It's just a character on a horse going through fields, finding monsters and killing them. I mean, what you'd have to change the story dramatically. I think it's a narrative that works effectively in video game form because it's about the player doing what he's doing and reflecting on it with the ending, right? Am I right?
Yeah, that's true.
There's a degree of meta communication between video game and player in terms of you just did this to save your girlfriend, isn't it? You're the princess or
correct,
whatever. Yeah. But you also wiped out this species.
Hmm.
Was it worth it? I mean, can they translate that to film? I don't know how I feel about that. I don't think it's worth it. What do you need to do that for?
I'd be curious to see where they could go with something like that.
Visually, yeah, maybe.
And that brings us up to the main point today in terms of the fact I recently watched the latest 2023 version of Twisted Metal adapted into a 10-episode series. And they have stayed very close to the source material on this.
Really?
Very much so. There is a lot of the game. You can tell that the writers are clearly fans. There's so many nods. There's so many characters that whilst they may not be as well represented as you'd appreciate, the minor characters, throwaway characters from singular games, left, right, and center, are all represented in some fashion. Your characters.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, you made reference earlier on to Mr. Slam. He's in this.
Really?
But only as a bit part character, just off to one side.
Yeah, you can't.
But the fact they reference like a pit viper and things like that, and Axel gets a flash shot of him at one point.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, but not enough. Only a taste, because I feel that they've written this with the intent of seeing how it'd be received by the audience. Because a show like this, it's tricky to know which demographic it's aimed at. Because it's a mature show. It is very violent, and they do go to town on that violence. This is one thing about this current era of television, is that violent TV shows were something that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the game came out, there was no such thing as that. That you didn't get TV shows like that. But more recently, we've started to be allowed TV shows due to the likes of streaming, which can be binged and which can really push the buttons in terms of how much you can show on the screen. I mean, there is a lot of blood, guts, violence, decapitations, everything in this. And how could they do anything else with Twisted Metal in mind? I mean, they couldn't. I mean, the game itself is supremely violent. And to that end, they lean fully into it. They don't shy away from the concept of it. It is about, this story specifically is about a character called John Doe that's played by Anthony Mackie.
John Doe?
Yeah. No, but the reason for him calling himself that is due to the fact that he's an amnesiac. He has no idea.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he's picked that name because he doesn't have any name to attach to himself, and he works as what's known as a milkman in this post-apocalyptic world, delivering between different settlements, providing supplies to the different groups of people, and fighting off the bandits that attack and want to get hold of the goods that he's carrying. And his car, if he goes by the name of Evelyn, he has a very close relationship with.
That's cool. It's cool that you have the characters in the cars' names as well.
Yeah. And he's joined by Stephanie Beatriz. Now, she's most well known for her performance in Brooklyn Nine-Nine as Rosa.
Mm-hmm.
And I especially liked her in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. She's very good at deadpan comedy. And this show allows her to branch out a little bit more, to lean even more so into her comical angles, because she is a very funny actress. And the two of them have some great chemistry in terms of just acting opposite each other, the back and forth, the fighting, and as I say, she is intended to eventually become a love interest. However, the best part of this show, and this might be hit or miss for some people might find it a touch too goofy, other people might think, that's perfect. And that would be the character of Sweet Tooth.
Of course, the most iconic thing about Twisted Metal.
Now, Sweet Tooth is played by two people. Mm-hmm. And they pulled a Darth Vader on him, man.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a body of one and it's a voice of another.
All right, okay.
And you know both of them.
Okay.
So, the voice of Sweet Tooth is played by Will Arnett.
What?
And
Okay.
he's loving life. I mean, you know that he can deal with comedy exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Whilst the body is played by someone a little bit out of left field. You probably didn't see this coming, but Samoa Joe.
Samoa Joe? Well, he's
Yeah.
big enough.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And
He's finally made it into films.
he's going the route of the Rock, man. I swear to God.
But he's obviously wearing a mask and doesn't speak.
You can see his eyes, and he is going for it, man. The acting is hilarious. I mean, physical as well as the verbal comedy. It's a very good combination of the two. And I will be honest, I found him immensely entertaining. He's not in every episode, and he's more than just a bad guy. I mean, it'd be too easy to have it that you've got John Doe and Quiet, which is Stephanie Beatrice's character, versus Sweet Tooth. It's not that story. Sweet Tooth is not an antagonist.
Does he set fire to his head? That's what I want to know.
Yes.
You're joking. He does. Oh my god.
And it's actually fucking hilarious. It goes into it delves into his past, and you find out more about who he was prior to becoming Sweet Tooth. And it is a genuinely interesting story. It ties in and actually makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I will be honest, on my deep dive into Twisted Metal, I found a lot of what was represented in the show actually is lifted from the games. For instance, the fact that his best friend is a brown paper bag. And things like that. It's just, he's, as I say, he's not an antagonist or a bad guy in the sense that he's versus the main characters. He has a subplot that moves through the TV show in concert with the main storyline of John Doe and Quiet. And he has certain aspects taking place that leads to a final climax, which is exactly what you'd expect in this show. You'd expect it to build to a final cataclysmic face-off with multiple characters driving around an area trying to destroy each other.
Is it about a tournament like the games then?
Not yet.
Oh, right.
This is an introductory series.
Oh, really? So they're doing another one? Oh, I got to get around to this.
I sincerely hope so, because what they promised in the second one was mention of the tournament. So, and yeah, Calypso is in it just as a voice. It delivers enough for me to go, if a second season of this is made, I shall be watching it. Also has another character in it who he pops up every now and again. He's one of those, it's that guy, guys. In terms of Thomas Hayden Church, who plays Agent Stone. Yeah.
Yes.
Most notably playing the Sandman in the Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man 3.
Yes.
Which was...
He's great in that.
Exceptionally good in that, yeah.
In
a movie that was an otherwise goofy movie and leaned a little too hard onto its comic book elements, he actually really brought some poignancy to that movie. And he is a good actor. He
is good.
And yeah, he plays a former police officer who is currently trying to rebuild the law enforcement of this world. And this one element of this show that I did appreciate is the world has gone to shit. There was some form of apocalyptic event that wiped out a significant portion of the population. However, they don't feel the need to explain any of what actually happened. You don't need to know.
Let's be honest, it's been done 1,000 times before. You don't need to know this.
Yes, exactly. It's as far as you go in that side of things, you don't need to understand what's happening over there. All you need to know is it's the end of the world happened, and this is what happened next. Now, there are a couple of cameos in this show, one or two of which I was immensely happy to see, such as a gentleman called Jason Mantzoukas, who plays Preacher, one of the characters from the original game. And that is another character from Brooklyn Nine-Nine who was Adrian Pimento, who is a very wild-eyed, crazy actor who brings an insane amount of energy regardless of the role you ever give him, and I just find him immensely entertaining to watch. Now, the show itself makes the interesting choice of picking its soundtrack from the years prior to when the apocalypse occurred in storyline. So that would be 2002 is when it occurred according to this show. As a result, you've got a soundtrack that jumps from the likes of Cypress Hill being a rock superstar to Hanson to Champagne Supernova by Oasis. And there's something almost charming about the way in which because this is an era where no music was made after the events of the apocalypse, this is the music that characters in the show listen to.
That's cool. That's cool.
As I say, it's a show that's surprised me. I was glad that I dived into it. I mean, it was easy to just see it as a cash grab. Although, I will be honest, the thing that drew me to me was the fact that it was just such an obscure deep cut into PlayStation lore that I thought...
It is at this point, isn't it? Because the games aren't really a thing anymore. I
So,
mean,
yeah,
when was the last game even released, you know?
I think well, they did sporadically release them up until about 2009, I think it was, or something in that. I mean,
PlayStation 3 era, that sounds about right. Where it skips like
and
2
even then, those
generations.
games weren't really pulling the same sort of numbers or profile that the previous one. I mean, Twisted Metal Black, I think, was the last big one. That was
PlayStation 2. No, there was one on PS3, but I'm not sure. I think it might have been a download only.
Like Twisted Metal. It was originally meant to be a download, but they pushed for it to be.
Okay.
Yeah, because they still felt there was still some fuel in the tank on that one. Although there have been a number of different itinerations of this game over the years, even though it was plagued by issues in terms of its original creating studio and being taken over by other studios who had to institute new code and the likes. But nonetheless, this is a show that anyone who proclaims himself a Twisted Metal fan is probably a part of a very small demographic at this point. Nonetheless, it brought back some memories for me. I really did enjoy this show.
I need to check it out. I need to watch it.
I'd strongly encourage, man. I think you might be pleasantly surprised.
I mean,
it does suffer from that kind of glib humour that comes with these sort of things these days. I mean, I'm not talking full-on Joss Whedon or Deadpool. There's literally only one meta joke in the entire series. And that is literally in the first 30 seconds of the TV show, as the main character's driving through a shopping centre, a copy of the Twisted Metal game lands on his windshield.
Wow.
And he flicks it off with his windshield wiper and just makes a confused look for a second and just carries on. That is literally it in terms of any sort of meta reference. And I can forgive it that. I mean, it was just that's a kind of the equivalent of a sly wink to the camera. So, however, if they had started leaning on the fourth wall even more than that, then maybe there would be criticism to be had.
Good.
So, all in all, I consider this a show that I would encourage to fellow people of my era when it comes to the PlayStation, people that maybe dabbled in Twisted Metal and are looking for something just a touch different. Although I do suffer from that aspect of encouraging a show to people without confirmation that season 2 has been.
Well, is there a cliffhanger ending, or does the story finish?
No, there is an open-ended aspect of Calypso announcing the turn.
Sick!
At which point you get quick snapshots of future competitors.
Oh, I need to watch this, man. What is it on?
Right now it's on the Peacock network, but I may have found alternative means by which to watch it.
Of course, yes, of course. You might have found a copy lying in the street somewhere and happened to take it home and watched it.
Absolutely, something to that specific tone.
Cool. I have to get around to it.
But as I say, it's a good show. It's got good actors in it. I have very little criticisms for it because at the end of the day, the original source material it draws upon, it wasn't that deep in the first place.
No.
And this allowed it to have some fun with that concept. I'm not looking for something serious. I'm not looking for Breaking Bad or a TV show that's going to start analysing the concept of man. I'm looking for a show that's going to give me that same sense of humour that the game's had. And on that note, it delivered.
Excellent. A good segment. I said, but it was more like a podcast pitch in the end, wasn't it? I need to get around to watching it. Well then, I suppose we will, unless there's anything else for you to say there, dude?
I feel I covered the bases backwards and forwards on that one.
Yeah, cool. Well, we're going to power slide, shall we say, without firing rockets into another break. And then afterwards, we'll be discussing the book Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer and its film adaptation. We'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. In this section, we're going to be doing a bit of a mishmash of ideas, a mixture of pitching and discussion and analysis as I talk Mark through my idea of the umbrella term zone fiction. When you hear the phrase zone fiction, any immediate ideas, Mark?
Well, without stating the absolutely obvious, it's a fiction pertaining to a zone of some sort. No, I'm not that familiar with the term.
Well, I've just invented it just recently. So yeah, what spurred this conversation is that I recently read Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, which obviously was adapted into the film of the same name on Netflix. The reason why I picked this novel up was because after studying creative writing and English literature for 4 years, and because I'm a bit of an old fart, I suppose you could say, I realised that perhaps modern fiction is a bit of a blind spot for me. I need to read more modern stuff. And don't get me wrong, I have read some modern stuff, but I'm definitely more educated in classic literature, pre-20th century and 20th century, like science fiction and whatnot, and literature. But regardless, I popped into local Oxfam, picked up a copy of it. I know that the novel has been somewhat polarizing. The reason why I'm aware of the novel is because I watched the film on Netflix, and as Mark will remember me telling him when I watched it, 3 or 4 years ago, I absolutely hated it for the reasons of which I will go into shortly. But yes, this idea of zone fiction, a field or zone that changes an area in a narrative, which essentially forms the basis of the novel, is something that intrigues me greatly, because we're talking about nature here in that regard. Nature being bent or warped and changed, and humans, characters being bent and warped and changed by the so-called zone. So after reading some interviews with Jeff Vandermeer himself, discussing the influences on the story and on the film adaptation by Alex Garland, it pointed me to reread a couple of classic science. Well, let's not say science. Okay, classic weird fiction novels. A bit of Lovecraft. Do you like a bit of Lovecraft, Mark?
Familiar with the term, understand the influence, although I believe
You never
I've
read
only got
Lovecraft?
No, I never actually got around to Lovecraft. I mean, I've
Oh,
always seen
right.
his influence in a lot of the stuff that I've enjoyed. However,
Okay.
I get the impression that I've always been shown a very pop culture angle of Lovecraft, the whole Cthulhu and the old ones and alternate dimensions. However,
yes,
I understand that often Lovecraft is a lot more faceless in terms of like the entity.
Yes, 100%. You are correct. That is what makes Lovecraft. That's what separates him, I would say, from other authors of the era. Obviously, we have the octopus gods and whatnot.
We've all seen Hellboy. We've seen
that these monstrosities are important to his lore, but there's also the unnameable, indescribable horror that he's, I would say, an expert at. So, well, okay, fair enough then. Well, I'll talk you through very quickly a couple of short stories, both of which have been adapted into film. The first of which is From Beyond, which was adapted into a 80s block horror film with the ever-present Jeffrey Combs. Have you seen this one?
No, but I do like Jeffrey Combs.
Yeah, if you saw the cover's got this picture of a character, and his face is sort of being dragged to the side, and he's sort of gurning. It's a really famous cover. I remember seeing it when I was a kid in Blockbuster and being horrified by it. Regardless, the short story itself was published in 1920, or he wrote it in 1920, and it's about a scientist that creates a device that emits a resonance wave that stimulates a person's pineal gland, allowing them to perceive planes of existence beyond accepted reality. This existence then goes on to mutate people in the real world. Sounds a bit like radiation almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting concept.
It is interesting. And then the next one is probably the more known short story and one of his most famous short stories, and has been adapted multiple times, is The Color of Outer Space from 1927. Have you seen the Nicolas Cage film then?
Not as yet, but it is very much on the list because
Yes.
Cage is a treasure, and I'll fight anybody.
Well, the short story itself is it's very good. I find with Lovecraft, obviously he's writing over 100 years ago, and his characterization has been somewhat outmoded by today's standards. It's out of date for sure, but his ideas and the execution of the representation of these ideas in prose form is almost always exceptional. So this one is interesting. Lovecraft was particularly dismayed at how aliens were depicted in science fiction / horror, pulp fiction, let's say, at the time. And he wanted to create something that was truly unknowable.
Something that was alien-esque to the point of...
So alien that we cannot comprehend what it is.
Rather than just being little green men or little greys.
Exactly. And he drew inspiration from the idea of colours being outside of the visible spectrum, and combining that with the extremely limited senses of man. And the story is basically about a narrator who explores a place referred to as the Blasted Heath, which is created by a meteorite that crashes into the Earth 50 years before. It emits a strange colour, and the area goes through a series of strange physical changes that over time is presented in a series of mystical, horrific events, such as the poisoning of crops, the altering of vegetation and animals, mutation, or locals going mad and being deformed. Can you see the theme that I'm already building here?
Yes.
It's ironically 100 years ago.
I mean, this is one thing I've always found. I've read about in terms of Lovecraft, in that often one of the triggers for his story is often man's hubris, in terms of wanting to understand the unknowable and actually exploring beyond what is the mundane.
Yes.
And that's a concept that's always existed in science fiction horror.
Yes.
And
so, something that, as I go on with this discussion with you, will become apparent. Something that has always appealed to me is the fear of the unknown. The less I know, the scarier it is very often. Which leads me into a discussion of the Russian science fiction novel, The Roadside Picnic. Have you heard of this one, Mark?
Only through yourself. Because you've mentioned it passing in the past. Yeah.
Yes. The reason for that is because it is one of my all-time favourite science fiction novels. Published in 1972 by the Russian S.T.A.L.K.E.R brothers. I'm not sure exactly when it was published in English. I can't really explain. I haven't got the dates. Maybe should have more research. But the basic concept of a roadside picnic is it's an allegory about aliens. Well, okay, sorry. In the story, aliens visit Earth, and where they visit is irrelevant. It's the footprint they leave behind them.
Oh, the blanket they throw down and have their snack on, so to speak.
Exactly. The analogy is that, you drive down a road, whatever, going wherever you are, through space, past multiple planets, down a road, past multiple towns, and you see a spot. It's a nice day, and you park up, and you get your blanket out, and you sit down and have your snack, whatever, get back in the car and carry on. And what that, in effect, does to the environment, you are 1,000 times larger than an ant, aren't you? I suppose, maybe more. Who knows? And probably many more. And you sit down and you're crushing soil, creating earthquakes, killing insects, all just so you can have a snack and carry on.
Yeah, an action that's totally thoughtless to yourself in terms of the impact.
And that's what this story is about, because aliens visit Earth and then they're there for a while. The area is cordoned off, and then they leave, never to come back. And this zone. All the people that live there are evacuated. And the effect of the aliens being there creates a series of anomalies, effectively radiation, you could say, seeps through the areas. There's 7, I believe, if I remember correctly, in the novel, dotted around the world. And it mutates, affects the environment. It also creates these artifacts, or they leave artifacts behind. And the central focus of the story is this concept of a stalker, as they are known as, who break into these restricted exclusion zones to find these artifacts, escape with them, and then sell them for profit. And evidently the story features a sequence of events. Officials, other people want to get inside and have a look around. It actually leads to the main character, Redrick, getting his girlfriend pregnant, of which she gives birth to a hairy baby who mutates and gradually turns into a monkey, which is forthcoming to what we're going to discuss soon. You know, that says a lot already. And the story is basically about how it's split into parts, and the final part of the novel is him breaking into this secluded room where a golden sphere exists that will supposedly grant wishes. Which then leads me to the 1979 film adaptation of The Roadside Picnic by the Russian auteur Andrei Tarkovsky, known as Stalker. Tarkovsky is one of my favorite film directors by far. I would consider Andrei Rublev one of the greatest films ever made. But Stalker is definitely up there for me. And what is interesting about this adaptation is that while it does continue the science fictional themes, it's much more concerned with themes of existence, as is the case with much of Tarkovsky's work. Tarkovsky is often fascinated with the interaction between the artist and nature around him, of human life, of memories. And in the story, a stalker, let's say, leads an artist and a scientist into the exclusion zone, searching for the room that will grant wishes. And it's very much just about their experiences in this zone. This, if you can imagine it, much like, well, let's hold that. Actually, we'll talk about that later. The way it's depicted is that in the real world, Tarkovsky films it in sepia tones. And then when it goes into the exclusion zone, it's filmed in color and it's all overgrown. There's machinery that's been has been left behind and whatnot.
Almost a Wizard of Oz effect.
Yes. It has more metaphorical meaning, but then, well, if you ask him, he would say it hasn't. But I don't know. The beauty of his work, and the greatest works, are that.
But that would be the jolt of the introduction of color to reflect the fact that you have literally been transported to a different world.
It's infinitely interpretable. You know. Sadly, though, he actually died of cancer not long after he made the film, because it was blamed on the filming of Stalker nearby a chemical plant. More parallels I'm bringing up now. More and more I'm bringing up. Which leads us to, in the 1980s, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, Mark. You had any interest in this over the years?
Well, as a young boy, I was somewhat morbid in my tastes when it came to reading, and I was really obsessed with disasters. And I read my fair share of the likes of the Titanic sinking, Chernobyl, among others. I've always had this fascination with them, the idea of nature or I say nature, I mean, in this case, it wasn't nature, it was very much man, but the fact that something so mediocre in terms of an atom can lead to such devastation. I mean, there was more around it than just the atom, but still, it's quite terrifying.
like man has mastered multiple. Let's say mastered. I don't think mastered is the right term. I don't think we've mastered
We've
any of
harnessed.
these.
But
Harnessed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Man has harnessed multiple power sources in its existence to further its own personal growth, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And none so dangerous as nuclear fission, But yes, you could regard it as an accident born not of outside influence, but mankind's desire, isn't it? And the Russian need for power, I suppose, as well. But did you know, Mark, that after the Chernobyl power plant disaster, the exclusion zone, as it was known to be called, the cordoned off area around Chernobyl and whatnot, did you know that you can pay money and go for tours inside Chernobyl?
I am aware of this, but only due to bad horror movies that use this as a setup.
Google it.
Yeah,
It
it
is.
is. You get like literal minibuses that take you up
Yeah.
to the blocks of flats and allow you to explore up to a point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you know that often the people that will guide you through Chernobyl have become affectionately known as stalkers as well?
Really?
Yeah. Synergy. It's kind of insane, really, how
life reflecting art.
How life has reflected art in this regard.
Yeah.
You
We
know,
do
I mean,
sometimes look to fiction in order to guide fact.
mhm.
Rather than the other
Personally,
way around.
sorry, after you, what did you say that again?
Rather than the other way around.
Yes, that's what's really fascinating about it. Radiation poisoning, mutation, it's all been mirrored from the previous fictional narratives I've discussed. And it just makes it even more fascinating to me. Did you see the 2019 Chernobyl miniseries?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
I did.
what did you think?
I did a recent deep dive on it, and
Mm.
I can sum it up in one word, and that's harrowing.
Yes, that is the word. Yes.
Because everyone knows that there was an incident and that a nuclear power plant went into meltdown, had reached critical mass, and there was significant devastation. But the real disaster wasn't so much the plant, but it was the sequence of events afterwards that were purely in the hands of men who had more interest in national pride and not appearing to be weak on the world stage, rather than...
Yes.
And that was where the real disaster took place.
Yes.
That there were multiple points at which the significance and the impact could have been mitigated to a much higher level, which it wasn't, because their own hubris and their own pride stopped them from doing so. It's actually quite upsetting to watch.
It's harrowing. It is absolutely harrowing to watch it.
Yes, I mean, I held it together for the most part, but I think it was around about the third or fourth episode when it was just 3 soldiers doing rounds and having to execute all the animals.
Oh, that was awful.
That was when it just really started to hurt. I mean, I couldn't look away. It was incredibly filmed, but it was just... At first, you think this head soldier is not a bastard, but then you realize he's not. He has such empathy, but he's doing it because he realizes it is for the greater good.
That's when he says, "Don't let them suffer."
Exactly. That things like that. I mean, a bastard wouldn't have cared, but he cared, and that's why he was willing to step up and do his duty, because he understood the repercussions if he didn't. Also, one thing about this series is that it made me despise Paul Ritter. And I love Paul Ritter. I've watched a show called Friday Night Dinner, and
He's incredible in this.
He was incredible. I apologize. Yeah, he has passed recently. He was a treasure. He is absolutely hilarious in that show. And
how
in this
dry and arrogant and just...
From the moment he walks onto the set, you're like the scene. You're like
the epitome of pride and arrogance, the pride and arrogance of man.
Yeah, I mean, literally from the moment the scene started, and that's one thing I'll say about this show that surprised me, is that with most disaster movies and TV shows, you get a build-up, you get an introduction to the characters, you get like a human piece where you connect with the people that you're about to lose. But not with this. This literally starts seconds after the event has taken place.
But it's a different kind of fate, though, isn't it? Radiation poisoning. These are not human beings who you get to know first, as you say, and then you watch them die in horrific deaths. These are human beings that are either committing crimes of extreme stupidity or or acting heroically, and their deaths are going to be slow and painful.
Yes.
In the future, that's the difference, is that they're doing it, and they know.
They've made the choice. I mean, there are so many heroes of that situation. Yeah. Most of them probably unsung. That, as I say, they did manage to mitigate disaster. They did manage to reduce it down compared to what it could have been.
Yes.
From those miners that dug the cooling system underneath the plant, to those 3 guys that dived into the water to sluice off the tanks. Specifically, domino effect situations that would have led to much more significant issues further down the line. And these are men that went in knowing the repercussions, and still they did what they had to do. And I think the thing that makes this the thing that really makes it drives it home is the fact that it's real. This isn't some sort of like 2012 kind of end of the world. Oh my God, the world is ending. This is much more localized, but it's much more real. And that's what gives it so much more impact.
Dying of radiation poisoning, let's say, I can't remember the technical term for it. It's not much different from dying of old age. It's accelerated, isn't it? It's accelerated death, essentially.
Vastly
Although,
accelerated.
Obviously, the firemen who were putting out the fire and the scientists who were deep in the reactor, who were closest and absorbed the most radiation, are the ones that died the quickest, most horrific deaths. And we saw that, didn't we?
Yes.
But obviously, some of the other characters, such as, played by Jared Harris, Legasov, isn't it? And the character real life counterpart, or Boris Sherbina, they both died later, didn't they? And as was stated in the credits, and they know they're acting, they're making decisions, they're doing what they're doing, and they know.
Yeah, I believe one of them only lasted about 4 years after the events.
Yeah.
And I mean, there must come a point when you're dealing with the situation when you are literally ripping years off your own life.
That's right, they did. I think they're quite ironic. They're all smoking cigarettes as well, especially Legasov. So many shots of him smoking.
Yeah,
what he's doing.
Well, very much the culture in terms of like the amount of alcohol they were drinking.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I've heard stories of during that era of like Russia. It wasn't uncommon for men to drink a bottle of vodka a day. It was considered to be part of the culture.
My God, sounds horrific.
Yeah. But Gorbachev was renowned for being a 1 to 2 bottle man a day himself. And it was just, as I say, part of the culture. So.
But yeah, the idea of radiation in particular has always been terrifying to me since I was a kid.
Well, it's always lived in... Well, ever since the 60s, it's lived in some fashion in fiction. I mean, there were times when it was made into something more than it actually was. For instance, like the comic books where you've got the Hulk.
Of course. Gamma rays.
And you've got and then radiation is probably responsible for about 30 to 40% of superheroes in some fashion or another.
Absolutely.
Whether it be toxic waste or radioactive spiders. But it was around the era of the Cold War, the real fear of nuclear annihilation sank in, and that is something that still lives to this day in public memory. This is why when even the talk of atomic bombs comes up in world stage when conflicts are in place, people are petrified of them, and rightfully so. It's just the atom, whilst it has done immense good in terms of the power that's generated for people, is a threat. And I believe atomic bombs...
Well, that's a political discussion there, though. Do you not believe in mutually assured destruction? Do you not think it saved the world?
saving the world through fear.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
I mean, technically, I suppose the ends justify the means.
Mm-hmm.
Although you can't help but wish we could find a better way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's not been a world war on the scale of World War One and Two.
No,
Some would say
and only
because
2
of
nukes have
this.
ever been dropped in
Yeah,
wartime or in
yeah,
anger, of
yeah,
hostility.
yeah. And many would say that the reason why we have any kind of peace today is because of nuclear weapons.
Yes, because we reached a certain threshold
Mm-hmm.
wherein we are now a species that can fully annihilate itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Regardless, anyway, that's a slightly more depressing idea. I just wanted to point, actually, as you mentioned earlier on, the cinematography in this series is phenomenal. I'm a big fan of the auteurs shot. You know those great shots where everything's like equal, perfectly framed, sometimes equilateral on each side, and you get like the characters in the center of the frame. It just looks so artistic and beautiful. The
Somewhat
color,
of almost a Wes Anderson style in terms of like
well,
having balance. Or he overdoes it to the point of
he is representing the auteurs of the past. Tarkovsky was famous for it. Him, in the 70s. Before him, others, I imagine plenty of other great directors did it. But also the soundtrack. I like to mention the soundtrack a lot. It's oh god, I'm gonna make a mess of her name. It's Hilda Gunnardóttir, maybe. It's the same composer as Joker.
I see.
And I did appreciate, although it's not really the kind of like film soundtrack you can put on a Sunday afternoon and with your friends and family and have dinner to. I found it was a very effective echo to the invisible nature of the danger the characters face. This constant background tension through strings and noise. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Overall, I like the show a lot. I like the show a lot, and apparently it was based on real accounts of survivors, based on a book. I can't remember the name of the book that was written by survivors. Did you know that the character of is it Olana Comic, played by Emily Watson, the scientist who is pressing Legasov all the way through it, the female scientist?
Yeah.
Not actually a real person, but a representation of the scientists that contributed to this heroic series of events. And I thought that was a fitting tribute because you couldn't have so many characters, just one representing them. So, but yeah. So, discussing the idea of great power, be it alien power, be it nuclear power, be it man-made or off Earth, affecting an area, and then therefore a narrative being formed within that area. There comes the video game, Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. Have you ever heard of this one?
I have not, no.
So this came out in 2007, and to give you a rough idea in your head about how it looks, you sort of imagine Fallout 3. A first-person, post-apocalyptic shooter. In this case, open-world survival horror. And the developer, GSC Game World, they sort of combine the ideas of the Roadside Picnic and Stalker with the actual Chernobyl disaster into a fascinating narrative. There's plenty of YouTube documentaries out there for you to watch about it if you're interested. But basically, the narrative of the game is that there's a second plant explosion that completely and totally irradiates the local area. And just as is described in the the book Roadside Picnic, and as described in the film Stalker, and as is the case in real life, people go into this zone to find artifacts. The story is about a stalker yourself who goes into the zone looking for artifacts. So basically, as you said earlier on so rightly, art and life imitating each other in certain ways. Someone had the very smart idea of actually putting two and two together and making a video game out of it. It's fascinating. one of the most memorable video game experiences, I would say. There's just something about the atmosphere of this game, the countrysides, the infected areas, the anomalies that are invisible to the eye, like radiation itself. As a character, you use this collection of like nuts and bolts, and you throw them ahead of you to test these anomalies, which is actually what the Stalker does in the film, the Tarkovsky film. But I'll tell you something that has always stayed with me about this game, and it sort of links in with the Chernobyl disaster itself. As I said earlier, like the concept of radiation and nuclear power is something that's always been like kind of harrowing to me personally. Man, harnessing this forbidden knowledge and powering cities with it. You know, a power that is so great that with misuse can literally alter man's DNA, you know, and change them completely. What about I can't is it Ignatenko? Apparently the woman who is the wife of the fireman who is pregnant, and the baby absorbs the radiation and she survives.
Yeah, and
then
they said she was rendered fertile by it, infertile even.
Yes.
However,
yes. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? And real. That happened. That's incredible. What a power. And we use that. We use that. It's almost like the power is alive. You know, it's conscious. And that's something that the game plays into very effectively, because all the way through the narrative of the game, you know, you're working your way through the zone, and it's about getting to the room of dreams in the nuclear plant, as is the case in Stalker, the film, and the Roadside Picnic novel. This place of dreams is actually placed within the reactor. So the start of this horrific series of events is the player character's end goal. And I always remember during the latter part of the game going towards it, and the story taking a massive nosedive, and there being wars, a giant war going on between factions as everyone's fighting over the nuclear reactor, and the nuclear reactor just being in the distance, and you getting closer and closer and closer to it, and it just being a character, you know. I feel like in Chernobyl, the TV show itself, they sort of filmed the reactor as a character, you know, that...
There were imposing shots. I mean...
Yes.
Very much, I'd say, with remember The Lighthouse of Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, where you've got the third character of the lighthouse itself, which is an ominous presence that is throughout the entire movie, and in this case, throughout the entire TV show. You want to hate it, but you know you can't, because it's not, even though it's made to appear malevolent, you understand this is just its nature.
It's almost like the station itself is so above mankind that it watches from above.
Yes, it doesn't hate us, it doesn't despise us, it simply is. And the effects, the radiation itself it's not an attack. It's just an aspect. Yeah. And sometimes that's all the more terrifying when there isn't an intent behind it.
No. It's understandable. It is not understandable. It is indescribable. It's unknowable.
Exactly.
And that makes it even more terrifying, even more fascinating. Which, funnily enough, that's a great segue into the purpose of this segment, which is to discuss Annihilation, finally. It took us a long way to get there. But I did want to say,
I like the hop, skip, and a jump you did.
yeah, that's good. That's a good segue. I'm getting better at this. But the reason why I wanted to discuss these other media ventures is because I wanted to draw comparison. You've seen the film.
Mm-hmm.
Can you like the shimmer? You know, and whatnot.
Parallels can be drawn quite clearly in regards to.
So let's go back to the beginning first of all. I'm going to say let's start with a timeline, which is my first viewing of Annihilation. So, you watched it for the first time when?
I watched it when that low-level hype was about, when it first got released.
It was hyped. It was viewed as the next big science fiction movie, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't buy into that level of hype. I was going at that period of my life. I was going for a lot of independent science fiction movies, whether it be Annihilation. Ex Machina was another good one that I
Same
watched.
director.
Yep,
Alex Garland,
and
isn't it?
I do rate that movie.
I've not
And
seen it. It's a big blind spot. I need to see it. How
I,
terrible of me.
I actually strongly encourage that. I consider that a very good
Mm.
independent science fiction movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I remember watching this for the first time. And would you want my opinion of it the
Hold
first
tight.
time?
I was going to say, because when I first watched it, yes, it was hyped. 99% of the time when a film is hyped, I'm resistant. Maybe it's because I'm an old fart. Maybe it's because I've read too many books. A lot of film, I would say, and in the case of, prose fiction, there are not many original ideas left. Often these are ideas that are being repackaged.
Yeah,
Repackaged is unfair. Repackaged,
rotated and finding a new angle.
yes, I would say that bad fiction today is repackaged, and the good stuff is, yes, as you say, exactly that, rotated, say, re-angled. I'm not a fan of Natalie Portman, and I never have been to this day. I really struggle with her. I liked her in Leon. I'm not saying it's because of Star Wars. I just don't find her a believable actress. I never have done. Apparently, Black Swan. I do like Darren Aronofsky stuff, but she's in it. Have you seen Black Swan?
No, I haven't, but I
Yeah.
know of it, but it's never really attracted me.
She was, acclaimed in that. So, but yeah, her being in this film was a bad start, and then within 10 to 15 minutes, it's very apparent that, from my perspective, being resistant to the hype, I was like, this is a rip-off of Stalker. This is a rip-off of the Roadside Picnic. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. This is why I wait years to watch hyped stuff. This is why I only watched Chernobyl this week. I actually watched Chernobyl for this podcast. I'm so glad I waited. I think Chernobyl is a remarkable piece of art, though, and I don't think I would have reacted the same way. Whereas I think that Annihilation the movie adaptation is quite flawed. But yes, it angered me. It also reminded me of J.G. Ballard's The Crystal World. It's a science fiction novel. Similar sort of premise as well. Have you ever read Ballard? He wrote Crash, and what was the High Rise? He did High Rise as well.
I have seen High Rise with Hiddleston. Yeah,
interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, one of those movies that about halfway through you're just thinking this ain't about a block of flats, and so, but yeah, a lot of metaphor to be looked into with that one. But at the same time, you can just
the book is good.
Yeah, I might actually give that a look because
give it. It's short. A lot of his stuff's short. They are like to quote the great late Ursula Le Guin, it's a thought experiment. It's
sometimes
an idea.
That's the best kind of story. The story that it is a concept that's brilliant but short.
Yes.
And they achieve it in so many pages, and they don't feel the need to fluff it out.
Incidentally, that's actually how I feel about another great segue for you, Mark. The book, the original book
of Annihilation.
Yes. Is Jeff Vandermeer's original novel is actually quite different from the book. Quite different in many, many ways. As stated earlier, I picked up the book to check out some modern stuff. So I'm going to give you a little rundown of the plot of the novel, Mark. And I'm interested to see. Are you ever going to read it? Probably not. It's too late now. You're on a podcast. You have to listen to me talk about it now. Unfortunately, you're trapped.
I'm a captive audience.
You are. You could close the call, but then I'd probably never invite you back to the podcast. And I know that would really upset you. So, unfortunately, I'm going to spoil this for you now. Spoiler alert. Yes. So, in the book, it's about a team of 4 women, and each of these women are of respective roles. The main character, protagonist, is a biologist. There is a scientist, etc., etc., etc. It's the 12th expedition, and all of the previous expeditions have ended badly, including cancer, suicide, and whatnot. Sounds quite similar, right, so far?
Yeah.
But none of these characters have names. They are known only by their roles, and that's it.
Or like the biologist, or
correct. That's exactly how she refers to the other characters, the scientist, etc., etc. When I first started reading this, I wasn't too sure how I felt about the tone of the novel. It's first person, which is often effective in a mystery horror novel, isn't it? Because you're only given the perspective of the character. The characters.
There's less exposition dumps and that sort of thing, because it's purely what the main character explains they can witness themselves.
A good writer would do it that way, yeah. There are plenty of bad writers who write first-person narrative with tons of exposition dumps. Because I was just going to say, like, I found the narrative voice to be very dry, concise, but very dry. Few contractions, very few isn'ts and wouldn'ts, full on correct English all the way
is
through.
not, will not. No, well, that's
correct. Which gives the narrative pace a sense of slowness and consideration. And it soon became very apparent to me that it is an epistolary novel. Have you ever heard of an epistolary novel?
I believe you've mentioned this in a previous podcast.
Yes. Yeah, good. Well, thank God you're here to remember this. Yes, it's a novel written in the form of letters. It's a classic term for a novel written in letters.
Yeah.
Whether or not Vandermeer would consider this an epistolary novel is up for his debate. I'm telling you it is. It's a spoiler telling you it is, but I figured it out pretty quickly that it's intentionally written this way. The novel is written as an account of the biologist's time in the zone, Area X, as it's called.
The thing about that sort of style of literature is it does. I won't say it spoils the story.
I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're going to say. Fire away, mate.
Yeah. However, a concept wherein someone is, as you say, writing a letter of events that have occurred,
yes,
gives them a certain sense of plot protection.
Correct. You are correct. You are correct.
Because you know for a fact that they are testifying to the events after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. You're right.
And I've got no issue with that to a degree, but it does. I don't know if that takes something away from the story. I mean, it takes away the potential peril, but to be honest, if they are the main character, the likelihood is they are going to survive to the end. There have been very few stories which they've actually bucked this trend. For instance, American Beauty, wherein the entire story is testified by Kevin Spacey. Love or hate the guy. And it actually turns out that he is talking to you from beyond the grave.
Yes.
In the final revelation in terms of that movie. And so there are some that will, buck the
not
trend.
quite epistolary, but I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
But as you say, any kind of prose fiction or visual fiction, even audiobook, whatever, if the narrator is presented as the narrator writing letters to you, then yes, they have plot armor. However, I agree with you there. This concerns me when I was reading because I thought, well, there's no drama. You know,
where's the peril?
Where's the peril? But this is a big but. What is the killer of the Chernobyl disaster?
It's a long death. It's the radiation.
So that is what makes the novel interesting. That's the smart side of it. You see, so we'll get to that soon. But what drew me into the novel actually was the atmosphere. It is literally dripping with atmosphere. The description of Area X, as it's known, is a marvel. The visual language that Vandermeer uses is so interesting. He uses analogies and similes that actually were very fresh to me. Very fresh. And you can't say that very often. I am on Goodreads, and I do like to read the odd review, and I saw some people critique him, saying, oh, he's using words wrong. I was like, no, he wasn't using words wrong. He was using them in different ways, original ways. I seem to remember this description of a mutated boar, and the way this action sequence is described being just really interesting. I was in admiration of his word choice. But the way he describes these elements, the world, sort of references his positioning of the novel as being a part of the genre of weird fiction, i.e., Lovecraft. It's all described in a Lovecraftian way. He often uses common objects and words to set the initial image in your mind. The lighthouse, the crawler, which is like a JCB style thing, the tower, but surrounds these common concepts with science fictional ideas and interesting descriptive language to build this aura, this weird sensation that is indescribable.
Oh, they become like reality anchors. The actual mundane tying it through to the fantastic.
Essentially, yes. Essentially, yes. If you say to someone the lighthouse, you can picture a lighthouse. But as I said, it's the language around the lighthouse that makes it interesting. What is brave, in my opinion, is that nothing is actually truly explained in the novel. A critique of the novel that some have had. As I maybe alluded to earlier on, not knowing the truth, not knowing the cause, not knowing the reality of the situation makes the situation even more harrowing. We had a discussion recently about this, about another franchise. Can you think of what it is? A franchise that never had an origin and was scarier for it. Can you remember it, Mark?
That'd be the Alien.
Very good, sir. Very good, sir.
Yeah, the moment they started providing an origin, they took something away.
Yes, just believing that these creatures just are out there for no reason.
The darkness of space can just sometimes spit out something like this purely through natural means, and that there's nothing you can do to avoid it. They are just simply an element of the universe. And that in itself is terrifying enough that the universe somewhere can create something like this through purely naturalistic means. Unfortunately, that does, going into the later movies wherein you have David going about his business in his lab. Yeah, I do feel that was a mistake.
So I haven't actually read the other parts of this series. I read only the first book, the Annihilation novel. I do believe that certain elements are developed later on that are not in this book. In the book, Area X is not explained. It's like Tarkovsky's adaptation of the Roadside Picnic.
It doesn't need an explanation, really.
It doesn't. It's there. It's there. It's there. They're in there. They're doing it. That's, that makes the horror. Because there are monsters, let's say, in Area X in the novel. And just not understanding them and not knowing them.
But the monsters are purely a side effect of the main horror, which is the area itself.
Exactly. There's actually a great use of location-based horror. I don't want to spoil it because I recommend reading it if I'm honest. There's a couple of areas in Area X that are referred to multiple times that apparently are developed later on, and he just does such a great job of building a narrative, weaving a narrative into it, hinting at it. As we've discussed before, a novel doesn't exist until someone reads it, and it's the writer's duty to feed information to the reader. Don't give it to them. Show, don't tell. Don't say to me the world has ended. Show me a character reacting to it. Don't just say.
Yeah, living that world rather than having an exposition dump at the beginning of this is how the world ended, not with a bang but with a whimper.
Exactly. And that's what he's expertly doing in this novel. Just gradually and slowly building this bizarre landscape that has all of these horrors, including, if you've been listening to what I've been saying for the last hour, you can probably put it all together and start working out what the through lines from this novel and the other, media ventures that I've mentioned. I don't want to say any more because I don't want to spoil it, but there's a lot. So, but yes, I was pleasantly surprised by this novel. Pleasantly surprised. I was not expecting to like it because I didn't give a toss about the film. And as I said, my initial reservation is about the narrative voice. And, it's an epistolary novel, which I do like. But the way it's used, Mark, it's actually very effective as well. It's very effective. I actually ended up greatly enjoying it. Hence the fact I'm talking about it now on this podcast. So it made me want to go back and rewatch the film. So, tell me, Mark, because you rewatched the film as well. What did you think?
I am a sucker for a good independent science fiction movie. One that's got that unknown, that's got that hook. And this does have that hook. It's got that sort of something initially for me. I mean, I spoke in previous podcasts that I've been very much delving to the likes of the SCP Foundation, the archives.
Yes.
And this movie lends itself very well in terms of you could headcanon it as being an exploration log from one of their SCP phenomena. The way they've got a team exploring, studying, looking to understand. And initially, I was into the concept, but something about this, it starts to break down a little for me towards the end.
Okay. How so?
Well, it's got all the hallmarks of the setup of a movie in this sort of capacity. Maybe I am somewhat ruined by the 80s in terms of I expect a bigger payoff. This movie didn't have as much of a payoff as I was expecting. I mean, I know the ending can be somewhat interpreted.
Disagree. It's easily interpreted.
I don't know. I feel like the rules by which it sets change.
Okay.
Wherein you've got Poe Dameron, Oscar Lewis, I forget, Kane.
Oscar Isaac.
Yes. Kane in the movie. That Kane in that hospital is the duplicate, with the original having committed suicide by phosphorus grenade. Whilst Natalie Portman's character, she's the original. However, she's infected, but it looks like she's been infected by different means from when she stared into the entity.
I think it's the film's insinuating that it's the duplicate that comes out of the zone at the end.
However, you never see that swap at all times. I mean, that entity is the thing you see get immolated. I don't know. I mean, that was one of those ones that sort of when the revelation at the end, when they're both hugging and both their eyes shine. It made me think back for a moment. I think no, it's changed its own rules, and I'd not say that takes too much away from the movie, but I feel it kind of made me misstep on how I felt about the ending. The concepts were good, and the designs were interesting in terms of seeing people shifted into walking, or as I say, in mid-step, bushes and trees. That sort of thing's kind of horrifying.
Visually, the film. Alex Garland's always had a visual eye, hasn't he? I mean, Sunshine is
exceptional. Yeah,
it looks exceptional. Yeah.
However, that ending did make me hit the credits with a sense of unsatisfaction.
Yes, I'm with you there about that aspect of the ending. That's why I said it was very obvious. I think it's insinuating that it's a duplicate, and that concept is trite and not very interesting to someone who's read more than 5 books in their life, especially science fiction books, or read or has watched more than 5 films. I thought that that idea, that attempt at a twist ending, was somewhat patronizing, personally.
Oh, like they're actually the aliens, or for want of a better term.
It's just I just didn't care for it.
It's been done.
But there's more, though. There's more. There are elements of that ending that are actually quite interesting, that are not to do with the duplicates and cloning. So yeah. Like I watched the film, and yes, the nods to Stalker are very present. The film, the exclusion zone in this film, whatever you want to call it, it looks exactly like the exclusion zone almost in Stalker, in Tarkovsky's Stalker. The fact it's called The Shimmer, I thought was a bit of a callback to Lovecraft and The Color of Outer Space. But also, I believe to be an intentional design choice for movie audiences to understand that they are somewhere different, a different area that has been affected by stuff. So I'm kind of okay with it. The Shimmer is not in the book at all. It's completely different. But
that's an adaptive choice, artistic.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so, and that's fine. That's fine. In the end, films and books are two different mediums, and there has to be concessions, there has to be design choices. You have to tell your story using the strengths of said medium, and that's fine. The characters in this film adaptation are far more fleshed out. They all have names, for starters. They all have their reasons to be there and their backstories, often tied to the idea of annihilation itself, be it cancer, self-annihilation, or even the annihilation of a relationship, which I thought was quite interesting. It sets up ideas. As you have discussed, this ending is not in the book. It's nothing like it whatsoever. I have not read the books, and we are talking about this book in a vacuum. And, let's just say there's no duplicate alien mirroring the biologist. That is not in the book at all.
That takes a significant aspect of this story out of it.
Alex Garland himself said that when he read the book, when he started writing the script, he wrote it from memory and didn't adapt it with it next to him. He did it from memory and effectively changed the story quite dramatically. But as I said, like this duplicate concept, which is not in the first book anyway, is not what I appreciated about the ending to this film. I'm with you here. As I said, it is trite. What I did like about it, aside from the visual flair, when she goes into that black hole, it looks fascinating. It looks very alien, maybe even Geiger-esque, actually. Giger-esque, how you say.
Yeah.
But one thing this film does early on is that it states that it's a meteorite, isn't it? Something comes from outer space and lands on the planet. It's explained. Yes?
Yeah. You see the...
it's an alien.
Yeah, the
object
it's an alien coming from orbit and...
Yeah. You know it's an alien, which you don't in the book. So immediately you know that this is an alien, and that just as Lovecraft set out to create an alien creature, species, effect that was truly alien, so does this film. And what do you think is the purpose of these duplicates, these clones? What do you think is the purpose of the mirroring sequence where, to spoil the end, Natalie Portman's biologist character ends up in a standoff against an alien creature that is copying her movements like a mirror, but in a slightly less human way, isn't it? It's visibly made to look less human.
Yeah, there's almost like a delay or a slight shift.
Yes, there's something off about it, isn't there?
It isn't exact, and
yes,
I mean that suggested to me the idea of study and learning.
Thank you. Exactly, 100%. That's where I'm with this is where I am with this story, is that this is an alien species that has come to the planet Earth, and its very presence is changing the environment. And whether or not its very presence is changing the environment is part of its studying process, we don't know.
I mean, there was a possibility that it could have been a terraforming element, because they said the zone
because of how it's changing. Exactly, because of how it's changing the environment. And the duplication process of these humans, yes, it's like they are studying and copying these humans to try to understand what we are. Why these duplicates are ill and die of cancer is not explained in the film, is it? You don't know.
It may be because they've left the Area X.
The exclusion zone. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, they are designed to survive within that zone.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe.
I mean, one of the elements of that zone that I found the most terrifying, which I felt they didn't explore enough of, was immediately after they entered it, when she wakes up in the tent, and everyone comes out of their tents disorientated and goes, apparently we've been here 4 days, but we don't have any memory of...
It's the hypnosis concept. Is there hypnosis in the film? Remind me?
I don't remember anything about hypnosis, no.
This is something that's in the book that's a big change. There's hypnosis in the book, and it's really. I thought it added a lot of tension. I can't say what it is. I advise you to read the book. I advise you to read it. It's only
I
short.
found that far more terrifying than any sort of like mutated bear or anything like that. The idea of just you could lose a couple of days.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's sort of that concept of just having no memory of what you've done or anything you've experienced up to that point, just disappearing from out your mind. That's far more terrifying to me. That concept. I mean, do you remember Guy Ritchie's Memento? Was it Guy Ritchie? No, not Guy
Nolan.
Pearce. Nolan's Memento with Guy Pearce.
Yes.
That was an anxiety movie because of the events that are happening to the main character, who you have the concept of not knowing what has preceded it because of the absence, and putting that backwards was a masterstroke on his part, because then it meant you were forced to experience the story in the same fashion as he was. And the idea of having no memory and having these events happen, and I felt that's something that could have been utilized a bit more in this story. I mean, not to the point of copying it and having them have memory blackouts every 5 minutes, but introducing a concept like that in Act 1 and just not really coming back to it, I felt that was a missed opportunity.
He was more interested in the aliens in the end.
Yeah. When the zone itself is what should have been the...
Yeah, it's what makes the original book interesting. It's what makes, obviously, as you discussed, the Chernobyl disaster. It is the mismanagement of humans after the Chernobyl disaster that makes the series so harrowing. The horror of watching these humans absolutely biff this period of events. But obviously at the core of it is the zone itself, the invisible creeping death, the threat, you know. And it's the same with the Roadside Picnic, and it's the same with Stalker as well. You know, it's the same concept. This unknowable area that affects and manipulates and mutates seemingly has a consciousness of its own. Is so unknowable, as I've said already, is what makes these narrative through lines so effective. That's what creates the conflict, as we often like to discuss on this podcast. So, can you got any closing thoughts on this film?
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm glad I watched it. I always appreciate watching a movie that I feel,
whether you liked it or not, it at least makes you think, doesn't it? At least it creates a reaction. It's an artist's vision, isn't it? It's not like it's a beige movie about nothing or film or book about nothing. You know,
there is a story there, and it is a story that once the credits roll, you sit there for a moment and you do consider the story. You turn it over you in your mind, and whilst it may not have been as satisfying as some stories I've seen in the past, there was still elements there that I enjoyed watching.
You're not saying it was unsatisfying because there was no explanation. You're saying it was unsatisfying because you found the duplicate concept ending, twist ending to be, uninspired.
Yeah,
uninspired.
It was when by the time it finished and the payoff had hit, and I was literally the moment it panned around to her and you see her eyes start to shine, I was like, yeah.
Yawn. Well, I just wanted to double check that.
Hell, I would have found it more satisfying if it had just absolutely confirmed that she wasn't a duplicate, but she decided to accept the duplicate because she missed her husband so much. That would have been a more interesting human.
Yes, and made it more human and understandable. Yes,
that she'd be willing to accept a duplicate of her husband.
Yes,
or an illusion of her husband.
Yes,
for want of just having him or a shadow of him, a reflection of him.
Yeah,
that would have been a much more interesting ending to me.
I'm with you there. I agree with you.
But that's just me. Yeah.
So, would you give it out of 10?
It's about 6.
Is it low? I actually originally it was a 4 for me, but I actually bumped up to a 7. As I said, I enjoyed it. In the end, my opinion softened on it because I read the book and the book's better. And I watched the film and went, "This is just a film. It's not. I know it's not the best. In the end, it is a rip-off." That's a harsh term. I don't want to use that term. It references some of my favorite stories, and as you stated, there are elements on it that are very, very effective. So I'll have to check my own. I can't bother to check it right now. Just for the sake of reference, though, I'm going to give you scores on everything that I've discussed here. So I would say that the Color Out of Space is actually a 7 out of 10. The story. I would say the Roadside Picnic novel is a 9 out of 10. I would say Stalker is a 10 out of 10 film. What would you give the Chernobyl miniseries out of 10?
Oh, that's a 9 right there, man.
A
Yeah.
9? It's too low. I thought it was a 10.
Yeah,
I
I will
honestly
be
thought it was
honest.
10.
I will be honest. I'm on the edge of giving it a 10. I
Yeah,
mean, it's nothing I can criticize about it.
I
Which
thought
I
it was
suppose in that
brilliant.
regard, maybe it may well be a 10 out of 10. Yeah, I'm always hesitant to give a 10 out of 10 unless something is.
Let me put this to you, right? When I was younger, and I remember Dave saying this to me. Dave, if you're listening, I'm sorry if I'm using you as an example here. I made the same mistake when I was younger as well. I used to think that when it came to reviewing something, I should be reviewing something objectively. There's no such thing as an objective
No, it's
review.
about how you personally appreciate it.
Exactly. The reason why Stalker is a 10 out of 10 for me is because it profoundly affected me. There are lines of dialogue from that film that are on my Facebook account to this now, just so quotable that when I read them, they remind me of why I do what I do, why I write what I write. He just captures the essence of the artist and the eternal struggle of the soul. And I greatly admire its visual medium, its visual use of the medium and whatnot. It's very slow. I imagine some people would watch it and give it a 7. And if they said that, I'd say that's fine because it's a very slow movie and not everyone's into slow movies. It's 2.5 hours long.
It's
It's
subjective.
slow. It is slow. Very slow. But personally, it's a 10 out of 10. And I would say it's the same for, the TV show. I'd say that if I was objective...
When you put that spin on it and doing a little bit of self-reflection, I think you're right. 10 out of 10 probably would be right. I mean,
it's one of the best TV shows I've ever seen.
It's going to stay with me for a long time.
Yeah, one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. That's why I bought it, to be honest with you. I said, even though he's actually on Prime Video, and I didn't have a Prime Video account, and I said it to you, it's on Prime Video, but you bought it anyway. Truth is, mate, I'm glad I bought it because it means it's mine forever. And I want to keep it forever. I wanted to buy it on Blu-ray/DVD.
I will definitely watch it again, although there's going to be a bit of a pause between now and.
You're not going to show it to Becca?
I've made her aware that it's available on our device, and although it's one of those ones that I will most certainly watch again, but I do want to. It's not something I could dive over and over. I want to leave myself to breathe on it, if that makes sense.
You want to think about it for a little while as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just. It's not just the big stuff; it's the small stuff in that movie, that TV show, that affects you. When you think of all the innocent people that were affected through no fault of their own, just purely by circumstance and location, and it's just things like that. It choked me up in places. I'm going to be honest. It actually.
I would say it choked me up, but I was like on the edge of my seat.
For me, it was different. It was just it was round about the point of when they started executing the animals that it started to kind of get me a bit emotional. Not like I'm not sat there sort of like grizzling my eyes out over it or anything like that. But there is a point when you think this is different to Annihilation or something like this. Is real.
Well,
and this is thousands upon thousands of people that were profoundly affected by an event for which they had no opportunity to avoid. They had no chance of knowing. There's nothing they could have done differently in order to avoid this. This was a train heading down the tracks, and that was it. That was literally their fate. Especially when it spoke of the woman who lost her husband and her baby. That one.
That shot when you see him
in the hospital,
yeah, and the radiation poisoning has completely taken effect because it's discussed, isn't it, that you start to recover and then you go.
It's like your body starts sloughing off the top layer of skin.
And you don't see it exactly. You see it in a shadowy, dimly lit room, and
you see enough to hammer home that is a man who is clearly he's in pain.
Oh, that's not a way to go, is it?
I have heard stories, and there was one story once that I read about which horrified me, but through some form of fascination, I read the story. This isn't a fictional story. This is a true account of a man who, in Japan, that was, I believe, Japan, China. I apologize for the fact I'm just remembering this off the top of my head, but he ended up being subjected to a significant amount of radiation, far more than any human had ever been before, due to an unfortunate incident at a plant. And the word came down from the higher ups that said, keep this man alive as long as possible. Now, this would normally be a situation wherein you would apply a mercy killing. You would actually put someone out of their misery because of the sheer amount of pain that man was in. But they brought in people with the specific intent of seeing how long they could keep a man alive. And they succeeded in keeping him alive for weeks. And they say that the pain that man went through during that time is unrivaled. It's unlikely that anyone else has experienced the level of pain that man was in.
Awful.
And it was done purely as a point of experimentation, just to see what is the limit of the human body when subjected to that sort of level of radiation, and how long can it continue to function. And he was begging for the end by the time it finally met him. And stories like that, they get you on a level that normal horror movies just don't touch.
It's real.
Yeah.
It's out there, and it could happen to any of us, you know. I can't remember if it was in the film, because it's been a couple of weeks since I watched the film, but in the book, the biologist discusses how she's literally glowing from the inside out. Was that in the film?
I don't believe so, no.
No. Like I said, it is discussed that she is being changed by Area X. And this change also affects other people as well, their perception of her.
Was the biologist Ventress the woman who brings her in?
The biologist is Natalie Portman's character.
Ah, fair enough, no, because there was a scene towards the end where the head of the team,
yes,
the one who's obsessed with facing the entity,
yes,
I mean, she literally does start glowing from the inside out.
Yes.
But that is her final moment, so to speak, when she just...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, like I say, I'm trying to not spoil it too much. It is discussed during the novel that the biologist, Natalie Portman's character, is glowing. It's my interpretation was almost like radiation poisoning, almost like that. She was being... I mean, I imagine, because I don't think it's radiation poisoning, but that, as I said, I was reading this novel through the lens of someone who is fascinated by these media concepts of zone/radiation inspired fiction, let's say. And that's how I viewed it, and it's not really explained. I need to read other books. I'm definitely gonna read them, definitely. The Southern Reach trilogy, I believe it's called. I believe the Southern Reach is actually mentioned in the film. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty much all there is to say about it, really, this little discussion.
Well, it certainly was a lot more of a somber tone compared to Twisted Metal, wasn't
it? Well, maybe we should have ended on Twisted Metal, but...
No, it's good. I mean, I feel that we should have these sort of swings in terms of tone sometimes. Sometimes it is good to get into the depths of... I mean, it's easy to have wisecracks and fun movies and shows and stuff and laughs and giggles, but sometimes you do... If you want to analyse fiction, you've got to take it warts and all.
That's what I prefer, as has been discussed anyway. You know, I do prefer to talk about the harder stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and this was, to be honest, this was just an excuse for me to talk about Stalker anyway. I'm going to be honest, I read the book, I thought about talking about it on the podcast, and I thought, if I talk about that, then I could talk about that, and I could talk about that, and I could talk about that, I could talk about that. So, you know, it was a vanity project, I'm going to be honest. No, hopefully I didn't bore you too much.
No, not in the slightest, man. This has been an engaging one.
So we should probably mention that we're going to do another episode soon. Do you remember what our next episode's going to be?
That was going to be some of our favourite 90s anime, if I remember correctly.
That's going to be a good one. I'm going to be discussing The Guyver, which is a big one for Mark as well. Mark watched that with me, I think, multiple times.
Those original sort of 12 episodes on VHS. So.
Yes, and there's the 26 episodes sequel series. I've read some of the manga, and there's the story around the manga itself. So, yeah, I'll be discussing that in the next episode. What are you going to bring to the table,
I was going to be discussing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and specifically the Stardust Crusaders, which is potentially my favourite. I understand that there are some arguments in the fandom as to what is the best JoJo series. However, Stardust was the one that brought me in. It's the one that made me go back and find out exactly how much of a badass Jonathan Joestar is. I feel that he got done dirty a little, but nonetheless,
he did. He literally is just like some kind of useless tentacle monster through the whole thing.
Motherfucker, that guy survived 2 plane crashes. He saved the world twice.
Isn't that his power is that he can see the future?
Yes, I mean, right? You've got fucking Star Platinum over here that can drag Falcon Punch anything, and you got Jonathan Joestar here who we shall get into this. Don't you worry.
I look forward to it. Well then, so we shall leave you there.
I believe we shall.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll catch you next time.
See you later.